Hello, my name is Sarah Crickard, and I will be reading from my award-winning book, Misshelved Magic. Library books had always been full of women who had changed history, defied fate, and spoken words of magic that could shake the very foundations of the earth. As Adelina stood blinking up at the endless shelves of books, she could imagine the collective hiss of these important women's disapproval in the rustling pages. She herself was ordinary. Did she really belong among the records of great women of the past? Come along. Myleta stood a few meters ahead, holding an oil lantern to light their way through the dim library. Her gray hair was pinned in ringlets pulled away from her wrinkled face. Adelina lifted her skirt a few inches so her sensible shoes wouldn't catch it as her heels clicked on the cobbled floor. So is Linza here, or... Myleta didn't answer, but continued at a hurried pace down the narrow aisle until it joined a wider one. She glanced at Adelina as if she half expected the girl to have disappeared. She didn't answer Adelina's question. Adelina was used to it. It crossed her mind to simply turn and explore the aisles. Thick dust and the smell of old leather hung heavily in the air. Through the gaps above the books, Adelina could barely make out the adjacent aisle, where shadows cast by her lamp flickered and played tricks on her eyes. Tilting her head, she squinted at the distant coffered ceiling. What might she find when she was free to read the beckoning volumes? But she forced herself to walk faster, catching up to Myleta as they passed a ladder affixed to the shelves by some machinery that allowed it to roll side to side. How would she ever learn to find books in the labyrinth of the history section? Something fluttered above her head, and Adelina looked up to find a floating book. It moved like a bird sailing past, its cover open like wings. It was moving the same direction she was, but it passed out of sight in moments. Among the wilderness of volumes, a well-lit clearing appeared. A solid wooden desk sat straight ahead, looking awkward against the space behind it. Several feet past the desk, a row of glowing blue stones were inset into the floor. Beyond them stood more bookshelves. Behind Adelina, the corridor from which she had just emerged was lined by shelves, their polished wooden end caps standing like soldiers at attention along the walkway. To her left, light poured through a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that framed a scattering of desks for patrons to use. To the right, the shelves continued, and Adelina couldn't see far enough through the gaps above the books to see how far they went. Myleta stopped. This is our desk. You cannot go further into the library. Directly behind the desk lay the area surrounded by the blue stones, the place that interested Adelina most, so of course she wasn't allowed. By the light of the windows and the electric lamp on the desk, Adelina surveyed the shelves beyond. Through the gaps, the sea of books continued. A corridor like the one behind her led farther into the library. In the distance above the shelves, lights danced, casting a glow against the ceiling. She wondered what was back there. Is that it, then? The place where the spellbooks go when they float away? Myleta pointed at the line of mosaic stonework along the floor, comprised of glowing blue oval stones placed end to end. Upon each, engraved script scored the surface of the rocks. Beyond that boundary is the spell section. Those books have nothing to do with us and are sorted by another. You may not cross it. She stared out at the expanse before looking down at the desk. We are working on converting our system. It's slow going, but at least we'll be able to find things faster when it's finished. Adelina wished Myleta would go on about the spell section, but she moved on to describing the layout of the history section. Behind them, something shuffled, and Linza appeared. I just finished the 4th century, you can cross it off. Oh, Adelina, you're finally here. Her brown hair was combed and secured with no regard for style. She wore a very simple white shirtwaist and a brown walking skirt, which did nothing to hint at a feminine figure beneath. Adelina exhaled, relaxing at the sight of her family friend, yet Linza's familiarity only heightened the sense of strangeness around her. Linza hadn't missed a single holiday, ceremony, or birthday since Adelina's mother had died when she was 9. With baffling accuracy, a package containing sturdy clothes arrived whenever Adelina began noticing holes in her socks or loose threads in her shirtwaists. The packages also came with a handful of interesting books. These Adelina read in earnest, preparing for the few times a month when Linza would visit. She'd arrive in the evening, a large bag laden with food slung over her shoulder. Adelina would tell her which book she liked best while Linza refilled their dinner plates and asked after the family's affairs. As her graduation loomed, Adelina had begun to consider where she'd like to work. What would she do when her life wasn't chosen for her anymore? But she didn't want more school either. For 3 years, she'd tried a handful of apprenticeships. None of them had been bad, but with each attempt, she'd grown more mystified about her purpose. Linza had finally stepped in on Adelina's 21st birthday. She'd put Adelina's name in for a job as a librarian, so here she was. Mylita crossed out an item on one of the various lists on the desk. Move on to the Knowledge Wars next. Weren't the Knowledge Wars in the 18th century? Adelina asked. It's my lunch break, Linza replied to Mylita. She set the lantern down and opened one of the drawers to retrieve a satchel. Once again, Adelina had been forgotten. She tucked her copper-brown hair behind her ears, squinting through her round wire-framed glasses. She'd worn a mossy green skirt trimmed in blue ribbon and a white shirtwaist, thinking she'd make a good impression on her first day. It felt frivolous now. Like every other child, she'd spent her rainy summer days in the library, the more public areas at least. The college preferred that ordinary folk did not come into the history section. The spell section was forbidden to everyone except magi, even some students. Adelina hadn't imagined that the quaint library of her childhood was a thin facade for such a strange and massive space. Mylita gave an audible sigh. Well, I'm meant to be leaving for the day. Yes, go on. Leave Adelina with me. Linza had already tucked into a sandwich, sprinkling the yellowed lists and tomes on the desk with crumbs. Mylita returned the way they'd come. Adelina watched her go, knowing that soon Linza would leave her to walk these corridors with only a book cart for companionship. A wild-haired woman in a bright tunic came down the corridor and nodded to the librarians as she passed. She paused at the line of glowing stones and pulled out an amulet hanging from a chain from beneath her shirt and recited something over it. It began to glow blue like the stones in the floor. She stepped over them and moved out of sight behind the bookshelves. In the distance, something shrieked. The primal sound set Adelina on edge. Linza hooked a thumb over her shoulder. Did Mylita warn you not to go past the line? Adelina pried her wide-eyed gaze from the spell section to look at Linza, who watched her with a slight smile on her lips. She was teasing. That woman just did, Adelina pointed. She's a mage, wearing an enchanted amulet. You're ordinary. Adelina wrinkled her nose and opened her mouth to protest, but decided to change tack instead. What's out there? She asked. The older woman chewed slowly, turning to look behind her. Those are the Magi's spell books, and they have nothing to do with you. You have no reason to go there. Adelina looked past her friend at the upright spines of countless books. She walked around the desk and stopped a few feet from the line of glowing stones. The volumes were small, the same size used for Adelina's written exams. She squinted, attempting to read the titles of the nearest ones. She'd always had a knack for languages, but the books were covered in foreign characters too small to read. Were they moving, or was it just the strange atmosphere of the spell section that made it appear that way? Linza stared at her, chewing. She set the sandwich down. I know you'd never break the rules, but just in case. There's also the cervara out there. The what? You could say it's the librarian in that section. Anyone caught wandering out there without protection gets captured by it. As far as you're concerned, that line and everything beyond it doesn't exist. Her tone brooked no argument. As if to punctuate Linza's statement, a low thumping sounded somewhere behind the nearest shelf laden with magic. It was almost too low for Adelina's ears to register, but she felt it rattling through her ribs. She took a step back, her eyes widening. You work here knowing that? You do too now. Linza wiped crumbs off her palms and stood up. I have to sit with my back to it? Adelina eyed the desk. It was far too big and heavy for her to turn or move. Linza waved away the concern. Don't worry. It's easy and safe work if you don't cross the line. We only deal with the history section. Adelina glanced again at the strange magical volumes. Her chest tightened, but with the fear came something new. Curiosity made her heart thump too. She tucked the thought away for later. Linza smiled and got up from her chair. She placed her hands on Adelina's shoulders. Are you ready to learn? Yes, Adelina bit her lip. I know you'd never break the rules. Adelina was trustworthy, dependable, forgettable.